My cousin had everything handed to him growing up. Brand new cars, private school, the whole package. Then, at Thanksgiving dinner, he discovered I had $10 million and had an absolute meltdown in front of everyone. My aunt started screaming and my dad just, "What would you do if the person who'd mocked your humble life for years, the one who'd been spoon-fed every advantage, suddenly discovered you were secretly worth $10 million? For me, it meant watching my entitled cousin absolutely erupt at Thanksgiving, shattering not just my aunt's heirloom china, but decades of carefully constructed family illusions. My name's Anastasia, and I turned 32 last month. My entire life, I watched my cousin, Jackson, get everything handed to him on a silver platter. New cars, private schools, lavish vacations, designer clothes, you name it. Meanwhile, I worked for every single thing I ever had. This stark contrast wasn't just about money. It created a complicated, often painful, dynamic between us. But nothing, and I mean nothing, could have prepared me for the sheer meltdown that unfolded when he accidentally uncovered my secret at Thanksgiving last year. See, I grew up solidly middle class in a Boston suburb. My dad was an electrical engineer, my mom a second-grade teacher. Our modest three-bedroom house, with its single bathroom, often felt cramped. My parents weren't poor, but they were incredibly careful with money. Every purchase was planned, every expense meticulously tracked. Impulse buys? Practically forbidden. Money doesn't grow on trees, Anastasia, my dad would say whenever I asked for something unnecessary. If you want something special, you work for it. That philosophy shaped my entire childhood. I remember at 8, saving for months to buy a blue Schwinn. Extra chores, collecting recycling, every birthday dollar. I earned half and my parents matched it as a reward. The pride I felt, sitting on that bike, was indescribable. Then there was Uncle Josh and Aunt Melanie. They lived in a sprawling mansion in one of the wealthiest neighborhoods, complete with a pool, tennis court, and a 3-car garage housing vehicles worth more than my parents' annual salaries combined. Uncle Josh had inherited a successful manufacturing business and expanded it considerably. Their son, Jackson, 2 years my senior, was the golden child. While I saved for months for a $20 toy, Jackson would mention something he liked, and it would be waiting for him the next day. The contrast screamed at us during family gatherings. Jackson's 10th birthday? They rented out an entire indoor water park. He tore through piles of expensive gifts, a brand new gaming console with 15 games, barely mustering a half-hearted thanks. 3 months earlier, for my 8th birthday, I got a new backpack, some books, and a simple digital watch. My parents had remembered I wanted it 6 months prior. The difference wasn't just about money, it was about expectations, gratitude, and a whole different set of values. Your cousins have different values than we do, my mom explained. We believe in teaching you the value of things, not just giving them to you. When we were very young, Jackson and I actually got along okay. We'd build forts, swim in his pool. But as we grew older, that wealth gap became a chasm. By our preteen years, Jackson had developed an air of superiority. He'd make comments about my clothes, asking why I wore the same jacket 2 Christmases in a row or why my sneakers had scuff marks. He'd flash his latest gadgets, knowing I couldn't afford them. Dad says people who work for other people will never be truly successful, he once told me at a 4th of July gathering when I was 11. Employees are just helping someone else get rich. I didn't know how to respond. My parents worked for others, and they seemed perfectly happy. But his words, like tiny splinters, sometimes resurfaced, especially when the material differences between our lives became undeniable. Moments of inequality hurt more than others. In 8th grade, my old laptop died mid-project. My parents said we'd have to wait for my dad's bonus. That same weekend, I overheard Aunt Melanie casually mention they'd bought Jackson his second computer that year because he wanted one with better graphics for gaming. I felt a complicated mix of emotions, envy, confusion, but mostly a quiet determination. A fierce desire to prove that hard work and perseverance could be just as valuable as having everything handed to you. Little did I know, our paths would diverge even more dramatically as teenagers, and those early lessons would shape me in ways I couldn't imagine. High school made the differences impossible to ignore. I attended the local public high school. Jackson went to Westfield Academy, an exclusive private school with tuition higher than some colleges. His uniform cost more than my entire wardrobe. He never missed a chance to mention his school's famous alumni. During my sophomore year, I got my first job at a coffee shop, saving every penny for college. My parents had been clear. They'd help, but scholarships and part-time jobs would fill the gaps. Meanwhile, Jackson turned 16 and got a brand new BMW convertible. I can still see him revving the engine in our driveway, keys jingling. "Sweet ride, right?" he'd brag. "Dad, let me pick the color." 0 miles. I nodded politely, silently calculating that his car cost about 5 years of my coffee shop salary. That same week, I'd been thrilled to find a pair of jeans on the clearance rack. "What are you driving these days, Anastasia?" he asked, knowing full well I didn't have a car. "I'm saving up," I replied, trying to maintain my dignity. "Planning to buy something reliable next year." He laughed, not unkindly, but with genuine confusion. "Why not just ask your parents?" A sweet 16 without a car is kind of sad, don't you think? That was Jackson's worldview in a nutshell. The concept of not being able to afford something or choosing to save was utterly foreign. In his mind, if you didn't have it, you just hadn't asked yet. Junior year, my aging $1,500 Honda Civic broke down. The repair was $800, money I didn't have readily available, as everything went to my college fund. In a moment of desperation, I swallowed my pride and called Jackson, promising to pay him back with interest. "Sorry, that's a lot of cash," he said, sounding genuinely regretful, but making no real effort to help. "Have you asked your parents? Or maybe get a credit card?" That evening, his Instagram showed him at an expensive restaurant, caption, "Impromptu dinner." Why not? The bill in the corner of the photo would have covered my car repairs twice over. I ended up picking up extra shifts and borrowing $200 from my best friend, Sarah. 2 valuable lessons learned: never count on Jackson for financial help and always have an emergency fund. Our graduations were different worlds. Mine was a simple affair at the football stadium, followed by a backyard barbecue. My parents gave me a laptop for college and $500. Jackson's ceremony was in an ornate performing arts center, followed by a lavish party at their country club with a live band and catering that cost thousands. His graduation gift? A brand new Range Rover with a giant red bow. He seemed pleased, but not surprised or grateful. It was simply what he expected. "You heading to state in the fall, right?" he asked later, referring to the public university I'd be attending. "Yes. Got a partial scholarship," I said, a note of pride in my voice. "Countless late nights, a 4.0 GPA. Cool, he nodded absently. "I'm going to Princeton. Legacy admission. You know how it is." Dad made some calls. I didn't know how it was. My admission was earned, not handed to me. I just smiled politely. That summer, our paths diverged further. I worked full-time, saving every dollar. Jackson's Instagram showed a summer tour of Europe, expensive music festivals, shopping sprees for his Ivy League experience. The contrast was stark. He entered adulthood with every advantage money could buy. I was preparing to work twice as hard for half the result, or so I believed then. I had no idea how differently our stories would unfold. College was brutal, but incredibly rewarding. My scholarship covered 60% of tuition. The rest, plus housing, books, and living expenses, was on me. I worked as a research assistant and picked up weekend shifts at a restaurant. 5-6 hours of sleep was normal. I was determined to graduate debt-free. I majored in software engineering, often the only woman in classes dominated by skeptical professors and male classmates who either ignored me or mansplained basic concepts. There were nights I cried from exhaustion and frustration, questioning everything. Jackson's social media, meanwhile, painted a different picture: elaborate fraternity parties, weekend trips to New York, spring breaks in tropical locations. Every few months, he'd change his major, bouncing from economics to political science to art history, seemingly without a care. "Mom and Dad don't care what I study as long as I get the Princeton degree," he explained during a rare phone call. The connections are what matter anyway, not the classes. Junior year, I had a breakthrough. Professor Amanda Martinez, one of the few female faculty members, asked me to stay after class. "You have a unique way of thinking about system architecture," she said, reviewing my work. "Have you considered internships?" I admitted prestigious unpaid ones were out of reach. She shook her head. "Let me introduce you to some former students. They started a small tech company, Visu, 2 years ago. They're looking for talented interns. It's paid, and if you impress them, it could lead to more." The following week, I interviewed with Visu, a startup creating visualization software. The founding team, 3 recent grads and a veteran developer, worked out of a converted warehouse. It vibrated with energy, not amenities. I got an internship offer on the spot, with a salary that let me cut my restaurant hours. I threw myself into the work, often staying until midnight, fascinated by the problems we were solving. The founders noticed. They started inviting me to strategy meetings, asking for my input. By summer's end, CEO Michael called me into his office. "We want you to stay on part-time during the school year," he said. 20 hours a week, flexible around your classes. "And we want to offer you something else." He slid a document across the desk, a small equity stake in the company. Fractions of a percentage point, but real ownership. "You think like an owner, not an employee," Michael explained. "We want to make that official. This could be worth nothing, or it could be worth something someday. No pressure." I signed the paperwork that day, but told no one in my family about the equity. It felt too abstract, too much like counting chickens. I just mentioned I had a good part-time job in my field. During holiday breaks, I'd see Jackson, now sporting designer clothes and talking incessantly about his network. He'd settled on economics, but complained constantly about the workload, admitting he paid other students to complete assignments. "College is just a formality," he insisted. "Dad already has a position waiting for me. Executive track from day one." I'd nod and change the subject. While Jackson was coasting on his father's reputation, I was building something from scratch, developing skills and relationships based on my own merit. The contrast couldn't have been starker, but I had long since stopped measuring my success against his advantages. As graduation approached, Visu offered me a full-time job with a fair salary and additional equity options. The company had grown from 8 employees to nearly 30, with Fortune 500 clients. We were still on venture funding, but the trajectory was promising. I accepted immediately, thrilled to help build something meaningful. Little did I know that decision would lead to a financial windfall beyond anything I could have imagined, and create a seismic shift in my relationship with my entitled cousin. 3 years after graduation, on an ordinary Tuesday morning, my phone buzzed. "Michael, our CEO, all hands emergency meeting, 10 minutes, main conference room." My stomach dropped. Emergency meetings usually meant 2 things, shut down or something monumental. Given our recent funding struggles, I feared the worst. I hurried to the conference room, where 30 employees whispered speculations. Michael entered, followed by our executive team, their faces unreadable. "I'll cut straight to the point," he said, his voice wavering slightly. 30 minutes ago, we signed the final papers. Data Corp has acquired Visu for $200 million. The room erupted. People hugged, cried, high-fived, called their families. My mind went blank. Later that afternoon, amidst champagne celebrations and transition briefings, an email arrived, my equity calculation. As an early employee with accumulated options, my stake amounted to just over 5% of the company. The acquisition translated to $10.2 million for me before taxes. I stared at the number, unable to comprehend that it referred to my money. 5 years earlier, I'd been working double shifts for textbooks. Now, at 27, I was a millionaire many times over. In the days that followed, financial advisors helped me navigate this new reality. I paid off my student loans, bought a modest but comfortable condo in a neighborhood I'd only dreamed of, and set aside funds for my parents' retirement. Beyond that, I made few immediate changes. What I didn't do was tell anyone about my windfall, except my parents. After careful consideration, we agreed to keep the exact amount private, even from extended family. I continued working at the newly acquired company, accepting a leadership role with a comfortable, but not ostentatious, salary that wouldn't raise eyebrows. There's no reason everyone needs to know your financial situation, my father advised. Money changes how people see you, sometimes in ways you wouldn't expect. His words proved prophetic. Around the same time, Jackson had graduated from Princeton with mediocre grades, but an impressive list of social connections. Despite his education and family name, he struggled to find meaningful employment. After several half-hearted attempts at entry-level positions, which he quit within months, declaring them beneath his potential, he finally landed at his father's company in an ambiguous role, Strategic Development Associate. From family gossip, it involved little actual responsibility, but came with a generous salary, a company car, and an expense account Jackson utilized extensively. Uncle Josh, apparently, hoped his son would grow into a legitimate role. Evidence of such growth, however, remained elusive. During a rare phone conversation, Aunt Melanie expressed frustration, bordering on embarrassment, about Jackson's professional trajectory. "We've given him every advantage," she lamented. "The best schools, connections, opportunities. I don't understand why he's struggling to find his path when other young people seem to manage just fine." There was a pointed quality to her comment, clearly a comparison to me, though she didn't mention my name. It took considerable restraint not to point out that perhaps those advantages had actually disadvantaged Jackson in developing resilience and a genuine work ethic. Instead, I murmured sympathetic noises and changed the subject. Over the years, I'd learned discussing our differing upbringings only led to tension. Aunt Melanie and Uncle Josh remained firmly convinced their parenting approach was superior, despite mounting evidence to the contrary. As the years passed, my investment portfolio grew under careful management. My career advanced through genuine accomplishment, not nepotism. I found the work engaging, the compensation more than adequate, with the added satisfaction of knowing my bank account held a cushion most people could scarcely imagine. The most significant change wasn't material, but psychological. Financial security allowed me to make decisions based on what truly mattered to me, not economic necessity. I could take professional risks, volunteer for causes I believed in, help friends in need without worrying about my own stability. Meanwhile, Jackson's Instagram feed told the story of someone desperately maintaining the appearance of success while contributing little of value. Photos of business lunches, networking events, motivational captions about hustling seemed designed to convince others, and perhaps himself, that he was building something meaningful. The collision of our divergent paths was perhaps inevitable, though I never anticipated how dramatic it would be. The catalyst? A family Thanksgiving dinner that would permanently alter our dynamics and force a long overdue reckoning with the consequences of privilege without purpose. The invitation arrived via text on a crisp October morning. Uncle Josh, though I suspected Aunt Melanie dictated the message. A knot formed in my stomach. It had been nearly 3 years since I'd attended Thanksgiving at their house. I'd made excuses, work commitments, travel plans. The thought of an entire evening listening to Jackson boast about imaginary accomplishments while Aunt Melanie made subtle jabs about my modest lifestyle compared to their luxury made me want to immediately craft another polite refusal. But something stopped me. Maybe it was time to stop avoiding. I had nothing to prove, and perhaps my perspective had shifted enough that their performative wealth wouldn't bother me anymore. After a moment's hesitation, I replied, "I'll be there. Thanks for the invitation." That evening, I called my parents. My mom sounded apprehensive. "Are you sure you want to go, sweetheart?" The last time was rather uncomfortable. She was referring to a Christmas dinner 2 years prior, when Jackson had spent the entire evening describing his executive role, making pointed remarks about people who lacked ambition, all while glancing in my direction. I'd maintained my composure, but my dad had nearly lost his temper before my mom smoothly changed the subject. "I think I'm in a different place now," I assured her. "Their opinions don't affect me the way they used to. Besides, it might be nice for us all to be together." What I didn't mention was a small, petty part of me that wanted to observe Jackson's inflated sense of importance, now that I secretly had more financial security than he likely ever would. Not that I planned to reveal it, but knowing it gave me a certain immunity to his posturing. As Thanksgiving approached, I found myself oddly preoccupied with a host gift. Previous years, I'd brought modestly priced wine or homemade desserts, accepted with a faint hint of condescension. This year, I could buy something impressive, but that felt like playing into their materialistic values. After much thought, I chose a limited edition bottle of bourbon Uncle Josh had once admired, along with a handwritten card expressing genuine gratitude. It was neither ostentatious nor inadequate, a small reflection of my evolving relationship with money. The week before, I had dinner with David, my college boyfriend turned successful financial advisor, and one of the few people who knew about my windfall. "So, you're voluntarily spending Thanksgiving with the people who've condescended to your entire life?" he asked incredulously. "That's either very enlightened or completely masochistic." I laughed. "Maybe a bit of both. I just feel like I've been avoiding them for years, and maybe it's time to stop giving them that power. Besides, my parents will be there, and they shouldn't have to navigate those dynamics without me." David nodded thoughtfully. "Just promise me one thing. If Jackson starts his usual routine about being a self-made success, while simultaneously bragging about his parents funding his entire existence, you'll at least consider dropping the tiniest hint about your actual net worth. The look on his face would be worth the family drama." "That's exactly what I'm not going to do," I insisted, though I couldn't help smiling at the image. "The whole point is that I don't need external validation anymore." "Very mature," David conceded. "But my offer stands if you change your mind. I'd even be willing to crash Thanksgiving dessert as your fake financial advisor with an urgent matter regarding your 8-figure portfolio." Thanksgiving morning, I woke early. I chose a simple but elegant outfit that projected quiet confidence, no obvious designer labels. The contradiction wasn't lost on me, caring about my appearance for people I claimed not to need approval from, but I rationalized it as armor, not appeasement. The drive to Uncle Josh and Aunt Melanie's suburban mansion took 45 minutes, each mile increasing the tension despite my best efforts. Their house was as I remembered. Imposing, perfectly maintained, professionally installed holiday decorations, and a circular driveway filled with luxury vehicles, including what I assumed was Jackson's latest, a gleaming black Tesla. Taking a deep breath, I gathered the bourbon, a bouquet of flowers, and my resolve before walking to the front door. Before I could ring, the door swung open. Aunt Melanie, impeccably dressed. "Anastasia, darling, you made it," she exclaimed with manufactured enthusiasm, air-kissing my cheeks. "It's been far too long. Come in, everyone's in the great room." I followed her through the marble foyer into the expansive living area. My parents spotted me immediately. My dad raised his glass, my mom embraced me. And there was Jackson, holding court near the fireplace, gesturing expansively to our younger cousins. He'd put on weight, his expensive suit slightly strained, his face fuller, his hair thinning despite being only 34. When he caught sight of me, there was a momentary flash of something, insecurity, quickly masked by his usual bravado. Well, the prodigal cousin returns," he called out, making sure everyone heard him. "I was beginning to think you were avoiding us, Anastasia." I smiled pleasantly, determined not to let him set the tone. "Hello, Jackson. It's good to see you too. Happy Thanksgiving." I had no way of knowing then that this forced pleasantry would be among the last civil words exchanged between us that evening, or that in a few short hours, the carefully maintained facade of family harmony would shatter beyond repair. Dinner was served in the formal dining room, a space used so infrequently it felt like a stage set. The table was immaculately set with heirloom china, sterling silver, crystal glasses, all catching the light from the ostentatious chandelier. Place cards directed each guest to their assigned seat, a level of formality excessive for a family gathering. I found myself seated between my mother and Uncle Josh's sister, Margaret, with Jackson directly across from me. A positioning that felt deliberately orchestrated to maximize comparison. My parents exchanged a knowing glance as we sat, my father giving me a subtle wink of encouragement. Initial conversation flowed pleasantly enough as dishes were passed and wine poured. We covered safe topics, mild weather, recent films, minor family gossip. I actually began to think I'd overestimated the potential for discomfort, that we might actually enjoy a peaceful meal. That illusion was shattered when Uncle Josh raised his glass in an impromptu toast. Before we officially begin, I'd like to recognize some exciting developments. As many of you know, Jackson has recently been promoted to Director of Strategic Initiatives at J&M Manufacturing. A murmur of congratulations circled the table. I maintained my polite smile, though I knew from industry contacts that Director of Strategic Initiatives was precisely the vague title created for people with connections, not qualifications. Furthermore, Uncle Josh continued, he's spearheading our expansion into the Asian market with a new product line he conceptualized himself. Jackson beamed with self-satisfaction, nodding ungraciously at the admiring comments from relatives who didn't know enough to question these claims. My father caught my eye briefly, his expression neutral, but his thoughts were transparent to me. We both knew J&M had been trying to enter the Asian market for years without success, and any new initiative was likely the work of the actual executive team, not Josh's son. Anastasia, Aunt Melanie turned to me with exaggerated interest. How are things at your little tech company? Still enjoying the 9 to 5 world? Before I could respond, Jackson interjected, Don't be modest, Aunt Melanie. I'm sure Anastasia's role is very important. What was the title again, cousin? Senior developer? Project coordinator. I'm the integration team lead, I replied evenly. After our acquisition, I've been managing how our technology is implemented within the parent company's existing systems. Acquisition. Uncle Josh perked up, business interest momentarily overriding family politics. I hadn't heard about that. Who bought your startup? Data Corp acquired us last year, I said, deliberately downplaying the significance. It's been a positive transition overall. Jackson's expression flickered briefly, recognition of Data Corp's industry standing registering before he regained composure. Well, that must be nice, having a stable corporate parent. Much less stressful than real entrepreneurship, I imagine. I chose not to point out that he had never entrepreneured anything in his life. Instead, I took a bite of turkey and complimented Aunt Melanie on the meal. The conversation shifted, but throughout dinner, Jackson repeatedly steered it back to his supposed business acumen, describing meetings with key Asian investors and revolutionary product developments in terms vague enough to be meaningless to anyone with actual business experience. My parents maintained polite interest while I occasionally caught my father suppressing signs of exasperation. The pivotal moment occurred during dessert. My phone buzzed with an email notification. I intended to ignore it until I saw it was from David, subject line, urgent investment opportunity, closing tonight. Given his knowledge of my Thanksgiving plans, I suspected it was genuinely time-sensitive, not his promised joke. Excuse me, I said, standing. I need to take care of a quick work matter. Everything looks delicious. I'll be right back. I stepped into the adjacent study for privacy, quickly scanning David's email about a limited investment opportunity in a promising green technology startup. The terms looked favorable, and the company aligned with my interest in sustainable investments. I replied, confirming my interest in allocating $2 million from my diversified portfolio, adding a postscript asking how his own Thanksgiving was progressing. As I pressed send, I became aware of someone entering the room behind me. Turning, I found Jackson standing uncomfortably close, 2 snifters of expensive brandy in his hands. Thought you might want something to sip while you handle your critical emergency, he said, his tone making it clear he doubted the importance of my interruption. Can't let the corporate overlords enjoy their holiday without checking in, right? Thanks, I said, accepting the brandy while slipping my phone into my pocket. It wasn't work, actually, just a time-sensitive investment matter. His eyebrows lifted slightly. Investment? Like a 401k adjustment or something? The condescension in his voice triggered a rare moment of competitiveness in me. No, a private equity opportunity in the sustainable tech sector. Private equity? He laughed, as though I'd told an amusing joke. Those typically require minimum buy-ins of at least $100,000. What are you doing, pooling resources with friends? Before I could respond, my phone buzzed again with David's reply. Jackson's eyes flicked down to where the notification illuminated my pocket. The preview text was clearly visible, confirmed for $2 million. We'll execute tonight. Happy Thanksgiving to you too, fellow millionaire. There was a moment of absolute stillness. Jackson processed what he had just seen. His face cycled through confusion, disbelief, and then something darker, a mixture of raw jealousy and incandescent anger I had never witnessed before. $2 million, he finally sputtered, his voice rising, disbelieving. What kind of game are you playing, Anastasia? I'm not playing any game, I replied, suddenly aware we were creating a scene that could be heard from the dining room. It's a private matter, Jackson. Let's rejoin the others. But Jackson was not about to let this go. He blocked my path to the door, his face flushing red beneath his designer stubble. No. You don't get to drop something like that and walk away. Are you trying to tell me you have $2 million to invest in some random startup? That's more than most people's entire net worth. Jackson, please lower your voice, I urged, hearing the conversation in the dining room falter as family members became aware of the commotion. This isn't the time or place. Oh, I think it's exactly the time and place, he countered, following me as I attempted to move around him. All these years, looking down on my family, judging our lifestyle, acting so superior with your work ethic and modest living. And meanwhile you're, what? Secretly rich? Is this some kind of trust fund you've been hiding? We re-entered the dining room to find all eyes fixed on us, dessert forks suspended in midair as the assembled relatives tried to understand the sudden tension. Is everything all right? Aunt Melanie asked, her practiced hostess smile strained at the edges. Ask Anastasia. Jackson replied before I could speak. Apparently, my cousin, the humble employee, is throwing around millions of dollars in investments. When were you planning to share that little detail with the family? A stunned silence descended on the room. My parents exchanged alarmed glances, clearly unprepared for this revelation. Jackson, that's enough, my father said firmly. Anastasia's financial situation is her private business. Private business? Jackson's voice rose further, brandy sloshing over the rim of his forgotten snifter. That's rich coming from you, Uncle David. All these years acting like we're the materialistic ones for providing our son with advantages. Meanwhile, your daughter is sitting on some secret fortune. What kind of hypocritical game is this family playing? It's not a game, I said, finding my voice despite the chaos unfolding. The startup I worked for was acquired last year. My equity stake translated to approximately $10 million. I chose not to broadcast that information because it doesn't define who I am. The number landed like a physical blow. Jackson actually staggered slightly, his face contorting in disbelief and outrage. Aunt Melanie gasped audibly, her hand flying to her pearl necklace as though clutching for support. $10 million? Jackson repeated, each word dripping with accusation. You're worth $10 million, and you've been pretending to be just a regular employee this whole time? Driving that modest car, living in that ordinary condo, acting like butter wouldn't melt in your mouth. I haven't been pretending anything, I countered, struggling to maintain my composure. I continued working because I find the work meaningful. I live within comfortable means because excessive luxury doesn't interest me. Not everyone measures their worth by their possessions, Jackson. That was the breaking point. With a roar of frustration that seemed to emanate from somewhere primal, Jackson swept his arm across the table, sending crystal glasses, fine china, and the remainder of Aunt Melanie's pumpkin pie crashing to the floor. How dare you, he shouted, years of insecurity erupting at once. How dare you judge me and my family when you've been secretly wealthy this whole time? At least we're honest about who we are. Aunt Melanie burst into tears, not over her shattered dishware, but seemingly from the revelation itself. It's not fair, she wailed, turning accusingly toward my father. You always made us feel terrible for giving Jackson advantages, for wanting him to have the best things. And all this time, your daughter was accumulating a fortune in secret. My father, normally the most even-keeled person I knew, stood slowly from his chair, his voice deadly calm. Melanie, what's not fair is your fundamental misunderstanding of what we taught our daughter. Anastasia earned every penny of that money through hard work, intelligence, and character, qualities we prioritized over material possessions. The fact that you and Jackson immediately assumed there must have been some deception involved speaks volumes about your values, not ours. The room fell silent except for Aunt Melanie's continued sobbing and the sound of Jackson's ragged breathing as he glared at me with undisguised hostility. "I have worked for everything I have," I said quietly, addressing not just Jackson, but the entire stunned family. "Every opportunity, every achievement, every dollar. No one handed me anything. For years, I've listened to you belittle my choices, imply that I lacked ambition or success because I didn't flaunt wealth or status. I never corrected those assumptions because I don't measure my worth by your standards, and I'm not going to start now." I picked up my purse and coat, suddenly exhausted by the entire charade. "Thank you for dinner. I think it's best if I leave now." As I walked toward the door, I paused to place the bottle of bourbon I had brought on the side table, still neatly wrapped with its handwritten card. It seemed like a symbol of something now, a peace offering rendered meaningless by the chasm of understanding that had finally, irrevocably revealed itself. Behind me, I could hear Jackson continuing to rant, his voice cracking with emotion. "She thinks she's so much better than everyone. Little Miss Perfect with her secret millions while the rest of us are just shallow materialists in her eyes." The last thing I heard as I closed the front door was Aunt Melanie's shrill accusation directed at my parents. "This is your fault. You raised her to judge us." The cold November air hit my face like a welcome slap, clearing the emotional fog of the dining room as I made my way to my car, hands shaking slightly as I fumbled with the keys. What had just happened felt momentous, a collision of worldviews that had been building for decades, finally erupting with a force that had destroyed more than just Thanksgiving dinner. The drive home passed in a blur. Streetlights streaked past my windshield, distorted by tears I hadn't realized were falling. By the time I pulled into my condo's parking garage, a hollow emptiness had settled in my chest, replacing the anger and defensiveness from earlier. I wasn't upset about the revelation of my financial situation. That was bound to come out eventually, and perhaps there was even a certain relief in having it known. What devastated me was the realization that my family, the people who had known me my entire life, could so quickly reduce me to nothing more than a dollar figure, could assume deception rather than achievement, could twist something I had earned through years of dedication into something that somehow made me the villain of our family narrative. Inside my apartment, I kicked off my heels and collapsed onto the couch, not bothering with lights. The darkness matched my mood as I replayed the evening's events, wondering if I could have handled things differently. Should I have disclosed my windfall immediately? Would that have prevented tonight's explosion, or merely spread the inevitable drama over a longer period? My phone buzzed repeatedly with texts from my parents, checking I'd made it home safely and expressing their dismay over what had transpired. I sent brief reassurances, but couldn't muster the energy for a real conversation. Tomorrow would be soon enough to process everything together. Just as I was about to silence my phone, it rang. An unexpected caller, Uncle Josh. My finger hesitated over the screen before I finally answered. "Anastasia." His voice sounded strained, older somehow than it had just hours earlier. I wanted to call and, well, I'm not exactly sure what to say, except that I'm sorry for how tonight unfolded. The apology surprised me. Uncle Josh had always been affable but distant, more concerned with appearances than genuine connection. This vulnerability was unfamiliar territory. It was an unfortunate situation all around. I replied neutrally, unwilling to accept blame, but not wanting to escalate matters further. "Melanie is." He paused, searching for words. "She's upset. She's always been sensitive about comparisons between our families, about parenting approaches. Finding out about your success triggered something in her. And Jackson." I couldn't help asking. A heavy sigh came through the line. Jackson is Jackson. He's never handled perceived slights well, but that's partly our fault, isn't it? We never taught him to process disappointment or measure himself by his own standards rather than others. The admission was so unexpected that for a moment, I couldn't respond. In all the years of family dynamics, I had never heard my uncle acknowledge any shortcoming in how they'd raised their son. "I appreciate the call," I finally said. "I think everyone needs some space right now. Perhaps after the holidays, we can try again with clearer understanding." "Perhaps," he agreed, though neither of us sounded convinced. "For what it's worth, I'm proud of what you've accomplished, Anastasia. Truly." After hanging up, I sat in the darkness for a long time, turning over his words, searching for the sincerity I wanted to believe was there. The next morning, I drove to my parents' house for a debrief that was equal parts emotional processing and strategic planning for future family interactions. My mother made strong coffee while my father paced the kitchen, still agitated by his sister-in-law's accusations. "The nerve," he muttered, perhaps for the 10th time, as if teaching you the value of hard work and character was some sort of crime against Jackson. "David," my mother interjected gently, "we've established that Melanie's perspective is distorted. Repeating it doesn't help anyone, least of all Anastasia." I sipped my coffee, finding comfort in their unwavering support. "What happens now?" I asked. "Are we just supposed to pretend nothing happened the next time we see them?" My father snorted dismissively, but my mother considered the question seriously. "I think time will determine that. Families have weathered worse storms. But regardless of what they choose to do, you have nothing to apologize for. Your success is earned, and your choices about how to handle that success reflect values we're proud to have instilled." She reached across the table to squeeze my hand. "The real question is what you want moving forward. Do you want a relationship with that part of the family? On what terms?" It was a question I couldn't immediately answer, but one that would guide my reflections in the months that followed. 3 months after the Thanksgiving disaster, I received a surprising text from Aunt Melanie. "Jackson started new job today, not at family business. Entry level at marketing firm downtown. His choice. Thought you might like to know." The message, devoid of her usual emotional manipulation or passive aggression, seemed like an olive branch of sorts. I responded with simple encouragement. "That's a big step." Wishing him well. Through the family grapevine, I later learned more details. After the Thanksgiving revelation, Jackson had apparently gone through something of an identity crisis, culminating in a decision to try building a career without his father's connections or financial support. It was the first job he'd ever gotten entirely on his own merits. And despite the entry-level position being a significant step down from his fabricated executive role, there was word he was actually applying himself with unexpected diligence. Meanwhile, I had been doing some soul-searching of my own. The financial security that had once seemed like a private victory now felt like it carried responsibility. After consultations with financial advisors and considerable thought, I established a scholarship fund for first-generation college students studying technology fields, specifically those who were working while pursuing their education. The initial endowment was $2 million, enough to support 10 students annually with tuition and stipends. I named it after my parents, honoring the values they had instilled in me rather than seeking personal recognition. When the local paper ran a small piece about the new scholarship, I sent the clipping to my extended family without comment. It wasn't about proving anything to them, but rather about demonstrating through actions, not words, what wealth meant to me, an opportunity to create opportunity for others. A full year passed before I saw Jackson again. It was at a cousin's wedding, neutral territory where family politics were temporarily suspended in service of celebration. He approached me during the reception, noticeably thinner than at Thanksgiving. His designer suit replaced by something more modest, but better fitting. "Hey," he said awkwardly, extending his hand. "It's been a while." I shook it, searching his face for signs of the hostility that had defined our last encounter. Instead, I found something unexpected: humility. "I hear you've been making changes," I offered, giving him an opening. He nodded, glancing down at his seltzer water rather than the champagne others carried. "Turns out starting over is harder than starting from scratch." "Who knew?" "Everyone who's ever had to do it," I replied, but without malice. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Fair enough. Listen, I'm not good at this kind of thing, but I owe you an apology. What I said at Thanksgiving, how I behaved, it wasn't about you. It was never really about you. I know, I said simply. The scholarship thing, he continued. That was really something. Mom. Showed me the article. It made me think about what I would do if I suddenly had that kind of money. And I realized I had no idea beyond buying stuff I didn't need. That was a wake-up call. We talked for nearly an hour, not about money or success or the past, but about the challenges of figuring out who you are when all the external markers you've relied on are stripped away. For perhaps the first time in our lives, we spoke as equals, each acknowledging our own struggles and growth without comparison or judgment. As the years have passed, my relationship with wealth has evolved. I've learned that money itself is neutral, neither inherently corrupting nor ennobling. What matters is the relationship we choose to have with it, the values that guide our decisions about earning, spending, saving, and sharing. The jealousy I once felt watching Jackson get handed everything now seems like wasted energy. In truth, I was given something far more valuable than material advantages. I was given the chance to discover my own strength, to build confidence through achievement rather than acquisition, to find satisfaction in effort rather than entitlement. And Jackson? He's still figuring things out, still untangling the complicated legacy of privilege without purpose. We're not close, but there's a mutual respect that was impossible before. Sometimes, the greatest gifts require the most painful unwrapping. The $10 million changed my life, but not in the ways most people might expect. The true freedom it provided wasn't freedom from work or worry, but freedom from external validation, from the need to prove my worth through possessions or titles, or the approval of others who measure success by different standards. True wealth, I've discovered, isn't about what you have, but what you value. It's about building a life aligned with your deepest principles rather than others' expectations. It's about recognizing that being handed everything often means developing nothing within yourself, while earning your way means becoming someone who can never be diminished by circumstance or others' opinions. If you've ever felt like the underdog in your family or watched others get handed opportunities you had to fight for, remember that the struggles that seem unfair are often the very experiences developing your most valuable qualities. The things we work hardest for become the foundations we can never lose. What are your thoughts on entitlement versus earning your way? Have you ever faced similar family dynamics where money or privilege created a massive divide? I'd really love to hear your experiences and perspectives in the comments below. I read every single one.